Welcome to today's social system mapping on-ramp session for, I'm doing it again. See, I need my crutches. November 8th, 2021. And okay, one more person. Anyway, so today Ben is going to share with you a really cool map he's been working on that I've gotten to look at a little bit and be part of a little bit and got excited about. And but before I hand it over to Ben, I'm just gonna, for those of you who aren't used to our process, we have 4 Monday morning sessions a month about a range of things, from a session like today, which is on the second Monday, which is an on-ramp, which for an introduction to social system mapping, in which a member of our community shares a social system map that they've been making, that they've made or are currently working on, and from deeper other sessions to. So let's just I'll let you know that everything, usually we have a bunch of links that Kara puts in the chat. Those aren't coming today, but they will come in an email tomorrow. So we do have a social system map that we invite you to be on yourself, just to get an experience of what being on a social system map is like, and how the tools kind of, the user side of the tools. You'll get links to more information in a follow-up email from Kara within the next couple days, as well as a link to this recording. And I'm going to go ahead and have us do just a quick chat intro in chat. That's interesting to know. Okay, I'm going to look into that, Lee. But for now, let's go ahead and have you put your name and your location in the chat, and a network that you're working with or a part of. Oh, no, I think somebody's unmuted in a way that is making feedback. Maybe not. So welcome, Casey, from the Just Economy Institute. Wildfire mitigation, yay. Earth regenerators, substance abuse prevention, connection partners, and the fourth. I'm not sure, I'm not familiar with that group. Okay, lots of really valuable, important work being represented in all of the groups that you people are part of. And so I just want to say how honored I am to get to work with such cool people doing such important work. And let's also have you put into the chat just what you're hoping to get out of today, or what brings you here, briefly. Silver City. I used to live in Cliff, New Mexico.
I meet the strangest people who have lived at some point. I mean, not the strangest people, but people at strange places.
Yeah.
I wouldn't expect that I've lived in this area. Yeah. Yeah.
Just actually, we live just, you know, Gila, where I don't know if what's still there. It was a long time ago, but just a little mile, just a little ways off the Gila thing, and then further up the river, way at the top of the river in the.
Yeah, that's a beautiful spot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm kind of on the other. I'm a little south of that. I'm in the Burroughs foothills, but yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I never see Silver City. Like, wow. Okay. So we have people here from people who've probably never even seen a social system map and doesn't know exactly what it is, don't know exactly what that means or is, to people who've been doing social system mapping for a few years now, and which makes them experts. So that's great to have the mix, and great to see, especially the new people. I always get excited with new people. thank you for coming. And I think I'm going to hand it over to Ben now. You ready?
Sure. Yeah, I was just browsing through the chat as well. Such an interesting collection of networks and interests and all. Yeah, hopefully this map itself will be interesting to many of you in terms of what we're doing, and it will also serve as a good introduction to this practice of social systems mapping and the particular tools that Christine and her husband Tim have developed through Greater Than the Sum, the sumApp mapping tool that interfaces with Kumu as the primary way to display the map data. So I'm going to share my screen. This map was developed in conjunction with an event. We called it a dojo, borrowing the Japanese term for the place of the way. And we thought of it metaphorically as a place to explore a certain kind of a way around this idea of how we move money collaboratively using our new capacities as networks and communities and alliances, so that the power to distribute money is shared by the funders with the ecosystem they're wishing to fund. And so we gathered people for this dojo in the middle of this year to offer a whole range of different activities to learn together, to share examples of how funding power is being distributed, to dig in more to the psychology of money. And then as part of the dojo itself, we gathered 2 pools of money and distributed them using collaborative processes. And so the map, which we'll take a look at now, there's more on this website if you want to see more about the dojo, and you could go back and look at the schedule. Maybe I'll just show that. It might just be to give you a bit more context about what this looked like while it was going on. Why are there no events? Because I didn't click. There we go. Yeah, so, in any given week, there were multiple sessions on different topics. And some of them were a regular series, like this learning circle happened every Wednesday for 4 Wednesdays in a row with different teams of people involved in sharing stories of collaborative funding work going on in Northern California related to the idea of a just transition. That was also a part of this whole exercise, was not just to talk about how we share practices of moving money, but how we do it specifically in support of a just transition to a more thriving and equitable future. So, because we were moving money and I wanted to make use of these mapping tools that I've been a fan of now for a couple of years, we thought it would be valuable to actually map the flows of funding itself that were happening as a result of the dojo. And so here now we're looking at Kumu with data that was collected through the sumApp interface. And the thickness of these arrows represents the amount of money flowing between any 2 nodes on this map. And these nodes are, we're not seeing the people right now. We're going to keep that data off of this view. I don't have permission to share all of that at this point. But what you're seeing here are projects, organizations, teams, and funding structures. So the funding structures would be the sources of money or the pools that then allocated that money, or conduits for the money. The money flowed out to projects and teams. So some of these teams just organized for the dojo. Some of them were ongoing projects that got supported. And then there are also maybe organizations affiliated with that. And so we can click, let's start here perhaps, with the dojo hosting team pool. So when we invited groups to be a part of this event, the ones that formed teams and said they wanted to host activities, action learning activities was how we framed it. Before the event started, we had a deadline. I think it was April 15th. Yep, it says right here. They were all eligible to request money from this pool. And the pool was $27,000 and change. And we had a collaborative process by which each of them could request a share of it. And it all kind of got hashed out among them based on sort of pro rata distribution according to those requests, with some chances for those requests to get tweaked and modified. And you can see here, this is using the focus feature in these maps, which lets you, dive in a little more quickly to that the money flowed in from the TRCC. That's the organization that sponsored the whole dojo, the Thriving Resilient Communities Collaboratory. We can look at that here. That should actually have the full name. Well, there's the full name right there. And so the money came in from that, from some other sources. We can see how that shows up on the map. It went out to all of these different groups that were hosting different activities. For example, the one we just looked at before was this one here. And that blog post that you just saw is linked to right there, as well as a story that was written after the fact, after the dojo had taken place, as a kind of a recap or what was learned, part of our action learning process. So you can click on any one of these and at least find a link to a blog post that they put in, and potentially more. And again, they're coded based on whether they're teams or projects or things of that sort. Here's an example of a project that's still ongoing and that was supported through the dojo, but wasn't organized for it. So let's see. Let's go back out again, just so you can see the money that came into the TRCC that went to that pool. We can see it coming from individual funders, from foundations. You can click on these arrows and you get data. So here we're seeing this is the largest single flow on the map, is a little less than $34,000 that came from, actually more than these two foundations. There's some anonymous contributors as well, but these are the ones that were open to being mapped. And so you get a bit of data about that as well. Then there was a second pool of money that went as the dojo, after that, the action learning completed, we gathered and distributed another pool, and that went out to these groups. And I think we can even show, well, in a different view, we can see that there were actually some connections between these groups that got funded initially and these, or in some cases, they're the same. We could even select both of those and focus. And that shows us, did I do that? I didn't do that right. Select that and that. Now let's see. Yeah, so here you can see the three groups that were funded by both pools. What you don't see, but in a different view, you can see is that some of these views, like Break Through the Capitol Gates, is actually affiliated with the same people that were doing the learning circle, these folks here. And that can be seen in a different view on the map. I think what I want to do at this point, though, I'm just going to show you one other view and then open it up for questions. Unless there's something more, Christine, you think I should be saying right here. So this, yeah, go ahead.
No, there were just a couple of, go ahead. No, you go ahead and I'll.
Questions in the chat, should I take a look at before I move on?
Nope, I was just having, so I think there was just a couple comments I was thinking that were coming to my head for people who are new to this. Often you'll see the circles, the nodes will be people or organizations, and will be gathering information in the connections about what's flowing between the two entities. So often these are kinds of relationships. They're, we know each other, we're, we collaborate, that sort of thing. And so what Ben is doing differently in this map is adding actual cash flows or dollar funding money flows into those. And so that was, I just wanted to sort of point out that that's what he's added to the sort of basic social system map dynamic that we're usually mapping things related to the system and things that are flowing through the system, the players of the system. And this is a new use of that, which I've been sort of thinking about for years, but never really had an opportunity to see. I never had a context in which that was either going to be appropriate or possible because of the politics of the situation. So this was really exciting for that reason.
Here's one of those more traditional views. So this isn't all the participants in the dojo by any means. We're still actually building out this map. but this is a subset of them. And many of us, not only did we put ourselves on the map, but we showed our connections to others. And in this case, it's coded by whether these were new connections or not. So the blue that you see here means that you met somebody through the dojo. And in some cases, there's a story about that. We can also we can look at the organizations and people's connections to them. And the red arrows here are showing who's in a lead role with something. So there's lots of other, this is more kind of typical data that you might see. Here's another thing that we did though that's a little less typical and shows some of the potential for getting creative with this tool. So in this case, we've decorated the connections between people in a special way. The gray are just where there's the basic connection without this additional data. But we asked two questions that had to do with value that people received as a result of their participation in the dojo, particularly from someone else. So if you wanted to acknowledge and appreciate someone else that you engage with here, this became a way to do it and to make that visible in the map. So for example, you can click on one of these arrows. The solid arrow means that there's a story, at least some kind of a story. It would be the answer to this question more about the gifts I received from this connection. So we can see what Joe had to say to Dunya based on just an hour of interaction. So here's more data we haven't even begun to map yet, but we invited people to say how much time they spent in a particular relationship. And we could do things like the thickness of arrows or some kind of assessment of what kinds of activities were generating the most amount of time. And then the other thing, the dashed lines, that would be an answer to this question here, where there was just a checklist of things as a result of our dojo experience. I've had an increased sense of the following feelings towards this person. And these were the 5 options. So in this case, I checked off all 5. It was really a great chance to meet Hannah and connect with her. So that shows up as just a dashed line if there's no story, but if there's a story, then you see it's a solid line, and here's a story about my connection to Medina. So I think that's probably enough to.
I think I'll toss in. I'm just going to toss in, just for those of you who aren't used to social system mapping, what Ben is showing you is, so a social system map is made with basically 2 tools. One is a data gathering tool that is designed to do specifically this kind of mapping. So it's designed to get at these, both the relationship, the personal relationships, as well as the systemic flows and dynamics in the network. That's sumApp. That's the tool that my partner and I built and take care of. And then but the tool that Ben is showing you right now is the data visualization tool, which is called Kumu. And so the data flows from sumApp, where it's gathered from the network, from actual people in the network, usually, although sometimes you have a special case where you can't, like in Ben's instance, where he's done a lot of input of the data himself manually, but the tool is designed to be an interface for network members to share data about their relationships in the network and about themselves. So that data is going into sumApp, and then it's flowing automatically into Kumu. And in Kumu, Ben is deciding how to decorate, what to show. He builds, it's quite customizable. And so the size or the colors or the ways the lines are showing or the thickness, all of that is customized by the mapper. And so the mapper can choose to highlight, like he's got those different views, and the different views are where he's saying, okay, let's look at it from this way now. And let's, like different ways of framing and slicing and dicing the data so that he can amplify the story that he's trying to tell. And then just lastly, and then the data flows right, the map can flow back into sumApp so that people, as they're inputting their data, they also can see the map in just another tab in the same tool. And Tony,
you want me to show that, Christine, quickly?
Yeah, 1 second. So I just want to add, so Tony asked, are all the flows dollar flows? Do you want to answer that, or do you?
So only in that first view with the green arrows of different thicknesses are we showing dollar flows. So that's part of what Kumu lets you do very flexibly is
what are the other flows, Ben? What are the other flows?
Well, the other flows were, for example, those expressions of gratitude we just looked at, right? Those were arrows in a different view in the map. Do you want me to bring it back up again?
Yeah, could you show the map?
Some of them might just be relationships, right? Here.
And so Tony, the other flows are whatever you define. So sumApp is totally customizable. So the biggest question is, since you're generally going to be asking about flows of the members of the network, the biggest question is, what questions can I ask people that they will actually answer honestly? But aside from that little constraint, or maybe it's a huge constraint, but aside from that constraint, you can ask for any kinds of flows, whatever flows seem relevant in your context, whether it's flows of love and trust, or shared information, or money, or material resources, like I have a wheelbarrow and I borrow it from this person all the time. However you envision that in your network.
Where are the flows defined at? In
sumApp, the sumApp tool gives you survey inputs. One is for the members of the network, and you have total freedom to define that survey however you want. And then the other one is for the relationships, the actual flows, and you define that however you want.
Right.
So
here's this is now sumApp. So this is how I enter data about myself into the map. And this initial tab lets me put in a picture and a little tweet. Then there's a survey. This is, again, totally customizable. So whatever you want to ask people about themselves, they put in here. So this is the information that you see on the map. When you just click on a person, it shows up in the sidebar here. So everything you see here about me, not the arrows, but just the stuff on the left, is coming from this survey, right? Now the connections are coming from these tabs. So here I can show connections to other people. All right, so for example, here's David Cobb. I have a choice to show the depth of my relationship to him, and then that can be mapped in different ways. Again, this is all customizable. We're also showing, this is where that data about, did I meet somebody through the dojo, or did I meet them outside the dojo, or did the dojo strengthen our relationship? Those are options, and you saw the blue lines on the map come from that being checked off, right? And then this is where those appreciations come in, right? So here's how many hours. Here's that checklist of the 5 things. So this is being mapped in a different view. You can show this data as a connection, and here's the story. All right, so if we go back over here to this view, and we go, now this is just what I call the people and entities view. So this is kind of a general view. But if we went to the connection gifts view, we could find my connection to David Cobb, and we'd see that data. Actually, if I just find him on here, anyway, there he is. So if I click on this arrow between me and David Cobb, everything that I put in here, right? This is me seeing all the different people here, and I pick David and I put this information in, and that now shows up as the data on this arrow, Ben Roberts to David Cobb. And these are the things I put there. The other thing you can do is you can decorate these connections. So in this particular view, the blue is somebody I met through the dojo. Red is that I'm in a lead role with a particular initiative, with a team or an organization. Orange is an interesting one we've prototyped too. That means I want to get to know you. I'm going to reach out to you and find out more. So it's another way of using this as a tool to deepen and enhance relationships.
So this is all Ben, at a high level. I'm thinking in terms of social systems is related to organizational systems, and thinking in terms of systems thinking. This is something different. This is, as was mentioned in the introductory video that Kristen presented, this is like a directory. This shows who knows who and who got money from who. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, it's a little, in all of our maps, there is a dynamic, which you could say is a directory. So, and often we just have a directory view, which a directory meaning you can find something. What is different about this though, is in more than a directory, which you won't find in directory, is you can start to see the relational structures of the network. And, so you can see the dynamics across the network, and you can start to use that to see and understand and influence the patterns in the network. So we're not just looking at what do we have here, a collection of disconnected, separate, isolated people, but we're actually seeing how do they fit together, and how do they fit together around money? How do they fit together around work together, et cetera. So there's multiple layers of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a core purpose in this dojo was to demonstrate our capacity collectively to move money in wise ways, right? To say that if we're moving money, the old pattern that says the people that have the money are the ones that should make that decision, and that they do it in a kind of a black box process where they get applications and then they decide where it goes, and nobody knows how they make that decision typically, right? And maybe at best they've got somebody from the community that's in their black box giving them some information, but that person can't have any access to the funding themselves because that's a conflict of interest. That whole model, we wanted to say, there's another way to do this. That's actually, if we want ecosystem-wide transformation, we have these networks as tools, and they are capable of making wiser decisions about where the money should go than somebody who happened to have accumulated that money because of some business venture or because they inherited it. And so that view, that funding flows view, to me, tells a story. It's not just a directory. It's saying, look at what happened here over this period of time, and we can then dig into how that happened. But you can see a very complex set of flows of money was negotiated through this process. And that, to me, that's the essence of the action learning that we're trying to demonstrate. So there is very much a systemic, it has some of the elements of directory or of just helping, being a way that builds relationships, a tool that helps to build relationships as well as to show what they are. And it can tie into larger systemic questions and needs. I'm working on another map where we have concepts on the map too. So people can put in, ideas and questions and answer those questions. And you can see where there's agreement or disagreement, things of that sort. You can also map resources using these tools and these surveys. So a lot of systemic questions can be explored, and systemic thinking can be made visible. I see a question in the chat about how this is being used on an ongoing basis. Should I move to that?
Sure. And then there's a couple questions also about maintaining a map and the sort of the ongoing stuff of it. So
I think that's what I'm looking at from Casey and Lee.
Yeah.
So we'll see. This is a map. This is a little different use case from the most typical ones where you have an existing network and you're bringing in this map as a tool for that network. In this case, there were multiple networks that we were tapping into to convene this dojo, and the dojo was a time-limited event. Our goal is we weren't sure when we planned it that we were going to do it again, but we've decided that we do want to do it again. And so this map will definitely be something that grows when we do the next iteration. We're in a phase right now, Joe Mon, who's on this call, is helping with that, of going back out to the dojo participants and asking them to add more data themselves. So that's part of the question here. This is a mix of data that we added, some of which we knew, some of which we solicited from the different participants in the dojo, and some of it came directly from them. And what sumApp lets you do is get that data directly from a large number of participants. So it was really designed around that particular need and the value of being able to do that. So you can give people access to that form I showed you on the back end to show your connections to people. And there was another thing I didn't get to that would show your connections to different entities, including receiving money, things like that. That can all be shared with a whole network. And we're in the process now of going out, for example, to get more of that appreciation data from the dojo participants. And then we'll use this to tell the story of what happened to the dojo to future participants, to future funders of the next edition, and see how this grows iteratively. So that's really the way that I see this evolving and growing and being more than just a way to tell a story of what's already happened, but kind of a static artifact as a result.
Sorry, I got distracted. And sorry, got distracted. If somebody had a question that hasn't been answered and it's in the chat, feel free to say.
I have shown other maps evolving over time, Brian, and there's a feature within sumApp that lets you code for that. And there's other ways to do that too. I could show you another map and sort of plot that growth if you wanted to see a really big network growing like a mycelium.
Yeah. So that is a piece that sumApp was designed to be able to just continually add new members and let members update both their relationships and their data about themselves, so they don't ever have to start over and like redo the survey every year or every 2 years. If you want to update your map, it just can sort of be a much more organic process. And then in Kumu you can show this is the map in 2016, 2017, 2018, and how much more dense, more relationships are being built, or more collaborations and more members, if you want to do that. So that's definitely a piece of what's possible. What other questions do people have? Feel free to open up your mic and just say them out loud. Claire.
Yeah, I was wondering if you, just how you handle participants that might not actually take the care to update their information and then potentially degrade, the connection and the material, how you deal with that.
So it really depends on your context. And one of the things that we really think about a lot, or talk about a lot, is that there is no this is not a precise. So, I mean, there's so many dimensions, and it's so massively entangled that we tend to try to do our best to be okay with good enough, and not worry too much about, is this exact, and see trends over time. So that's one piece of that. But in terms of people updating, you can, we're now currently in our network, of which there's a number of people here, learning how to do this, sort of working on a way of actually enhancing our outreach and like working actively to get people to see the value and to interact more, so that they want to do that. I mean, so it's not just gonna, the assumption being that people aren't just going to keep it up to date on their own. If they don't have if there's not interaction going on, both around the map and around each other, it doesn't have a lot of value for them. So they're not going to keep it up to date. So that's a thing you have to think about while you're making it, and as you're continuing to use it. And there was one more piece of that I was going to say, which was, I have seen contexts where people will note who has not done anything in a very long time, and someone's okay, and reach out to them and then remove them. So you could do that, but that's going to be on a case-by-case basis, and depends on your, if your goal is simply to know who are the, the in-network science, you want, there's close ties and then there's loose ties, and the loose ties actually are really, really valuable. So keeping them there is probably still valuable depending on the context. So you're going to there's a whole lot of tensions that you're going to have to think through in handling that. Yeah.
This is Jo. One of the things when I think about social systems mapping is really, without conversations, we are not going anywhere as a social system, right? Like, we have the conversation, we work around the conversation, needs to be facilitated towards an outcome. And that conversations need to be blended with how maps are organized.
Yeah.
One cannot operate in isolation. Like, we cannot just have conversations and not do anything to reflect on the network, how it has shifted. So creating space consciously for updating that map as to what has happened in us as individuals and in the network and the community or the organization because of that conversation, making space for it and updating in the moment, in the real time. It gives, I'll tell you one personal example. Ben had demonstrated that. Dunya and I met outside of the dojo. But just receiving a sense of connection with her, now we are collaborating on other things. So what I'm trying to say is, seeing that on the map was the first time I knew Dunya was excited to meet me and I was excited to meet her. And then we took that connection outside, and are developing our collaboration. As human beings, we want to be heard, we want to be appreciated, we want to know how we are shifting. That's our fundamental core need. And on social systems mapping, if we can make space for it, have conversation and reflect on the map, you are constantly energizing the map just by holding space. This also gives self-organizing power to facilitate your own your own conversations as well. Because you're drawn to that relationship, you're drawn to that conversations, you're seen differently from the work that you're deepening that relationships. And that's the social movement as human beings we can get into. And then from that place, we can create our future.
Thank you, Joe. That was great. Yeah.
This is Stephen Gilchrist. I had a question connected to that in terms of how the system is used. From how you described it, it's an evaluation tool, but it's a kind of a snapshot in time. It's an evaluation tool. And how are you using it to like when you look at it, how are you using it to help you understand kind of the leverage points, maybe what you would do differently from an evaluation perspective? And then I think connected to that is what Joe, you were saying, some of the work around the Presencing Institute, they talk about the need around systems change for the system itself, for the people who are in the system to be able to reflect the system back on the participants. And so if I'm understanding what Joe, you said, this map is also used to facilitate larger system-wide dialogue to figure out how do we shift it and how that happens.
Yeah. Go ahead, Christina. It's just
yeah. Well, oh no, I just lost it. Yeah, evaluation is one small piece of what a social system map is for, and it isn't a snapshot in time. If we keep updating the data and we keep, showing that we can show the evolution. So what we're trying to do with, the vision behind sumApp was to not to get rid of the possibility of evaluation and not to say evaluation isn't important. It is important, but to take evaluation and take sense making out of the hands of a few top-down experts and make that something that can be accessed by the whole network and be a part of the discussion of a whole network, so that it's a reflection tool for the network to see itself as a system, or for the system to see itself and to collectively make sense of it together, so that it's not simply about evaluation, but it's also about guiding action and making sense of the system. And so that's the part of the vision, and that is currently the leading edge of those of us who are doing this work together or learning together. This is something we're all still learning how to do, but the vision is to make this available from the grassroots and the top down, and for it to be multi-purpose. Yeah, Joe, there was.
Yeah, I mean, you touched majority of what I wanted to say. Collective sense making is made possible because system is having a voice right now. Like when you look at the map itself, like there is a story that the system is telling us. There are connections. There are some people who are embedded in the system that are like the Ben's map, right? He's pretty much connected to everybody. And then those are our leverage points as to how we want to influence change. That's one example. The value flows. Sometimes it's dollars. Sometimes it's, how rich the relationship is, how power is flowing. How are we making decisions, the governance stories. Those can all be reflected. And that's the point of a social systems map for me, is to be able to see how human beings are interacting, how they are making decisions, how they are acting together, how they are collaborating, what kind of choices they are making. And once we show light or shed light on that, it becomes conscious, oh, this is how I'm being reflected in a bigger aspect of the system. Let me get my act straight. There are a sense of like coaching and mentoring can also happen, or design stuff can flow through it too.
Thanks, Joe. So Catherine Smith has a question and has her hand up. Go ahead, Catherine.
Hi, thank you. I'm curious if there is a way to turn the map over to the community after the initial kind of project is done. I'm concerned for a network of my students who I would like to kind of connect both through alumni and through the current network. And but I think that I probably won't be able to be in contact with them for a long time. But I'd like to continue their connections together, and that's part of the project I'd like to do. So is there a way that the community continues to exist and thrive and see their own connections without an administrator?
So that's possible. And I've seen people try to do that in lots of contexts. And there's you maybe don't need an administrator in the sense of an expert who set this up and keeps it going, but you do need a team of people who are willing to learn to make tweaks tweaks both to sumApp and to the map. So there's a technical learning curve that that exists that you need to address, or the map will start to fall apart, and or just be static and not change it. I mean, you can keep putting data in, but you couldn't add more questions or make more views without somebody in that role. And you do need somebody to be willing to commit to doing some of the weaving work, the engagement work, and the inviting people to update their map work. It won't just generate that kind of energy on its own without somebody holding on to it. And that can be community members.
Thank you, that's great.
So I see there's some discussion about assets, and is an asset, is that different? And I know Ben and Jim, you responding to that, if you want to just add anything to the discussion.
Yeah, Jim, do you want to speak to that, or?
Good questions about all the rich things that can be mapped here. And from an assets perspective, I think we're talking about human capital, entity capital, social capital, and you might even think about resource flows themselves as assets of the system. So if you can see all that, that's just super cool. From a systems perspective, I don't know how much we've done of that. I think you all have more experience, but having the actors on the map and the resource flows, and if you're mapping impacts between entities, you're really starting to get into systems map territory. That's all.
So Tony made a comment about, where'd it go? Goals not being on, goals aren't on explicitly on this particular map, but there are a number of maps where, so it's not mapped out in like a cause and a causal loop diagram in terms of upstream and downstream impacts, but there are a number of networks where they have done that kind of analysis, either with mapping or with other tools, to figure out what are the goals of the system, what are the leverage points, what are the things, the main things that this network is trying to shift, and then those will be included in the sumApp questions, so that you can start to see who is working on what goals. You can start to see, you could even start to see who thinks these goals are more important than these goals. You could say, yeah, I'm a big supporter of that goal, and actually I think that goal is terrible and we shouldn't be focusing on it. And then you could see how many people are focusing on it, and that could be a really interesting conversation. So there are maps where that's the case. It just really depends on the context that you're working in.
So goals would be another artifact completely separate from the artifact that was presented. I forgot the presenter's name, but it would be separate artifacts.
How do you mean artifact in this instance?
That chart, that diagram, I call that's an artifact. That's one form. That diagram that was shown would be completely separate from any diagram that would show goals.
No, No, so here's a way that we've done. So when you say diagram, so if you're talking about the Kumu interface, which is interactive and has a lot of different views based on what what story you're trying to tell. In that same tool, you could make, and people have, so you could make a view where you're saying, let me see, here's the whole network, and I'm going to highlight who's working on leverage point A. And then you could see where leverage point A, how the structure of the system around leverage point A, the relationships, the density of the connections, if the people who are working on leverage point A, if there's only 2 of them, or if they're only on the periphery, and then you could turn that off, and you could turn on another highlight view that shows who's working on leverage point B, and then you could see the differences between those. You could cluster around them. There's lots of different ways you can present the data to start to see both the relationship of the leverage point to the social structure, or to how many people are working on it, find out people's relationships to it. So there's a number of ways you would look at that, but it would be within the same, if you've gathered it in sumApp and you want to incorporate that into this social system map that you're using, you would gather the data in sumApp and it would be presented in Kumu, just in a different, specialized view of that data, a specialized, how you filter it, how you cluster, how you decorate, how you highlight. Yeah. You could take data and you could put it, you can download it in a CSV file and put it in any other kind of data visualization tool, or you could manually do a whole lot of other things if you want to. Those would not be in a social system map. Those would be just taking some data and using it in another format, which is totally doable. And people do that as well, depending on what they're trying to accomplish. Did that make sense, Tony?
I think so. I don't know. It'd be all one big model, which you could put various filters on it. Is that what you're saying, Kristen?
Yeah, it's like, so what we're doing is we're sort of taking like data visualization as, as a tool for, data visualization is a way of condensing big data, taking lots and lots of data and presenting it in ways that that tell a story. And so we're doing that same thing here. We're gathering lots and lots of data, but it's all about the actors in the network and their relationship to the system dynamics of the network. So we're gathering a lot of data about that, the relationships and the people and the actors, and then we're presenting it in a graph visualization tool that.
The way I learned it was, I think Aikman, somebody did, actions have actors, the people that perform the actions.
Yep.
And so when I see a map, I'm not saying I'm just saying, when I see a map of actors, I'm saying, well, what actions are they performing?
Right. And that's exactly the underlying, so when I was learning, systems thinking, there's forces. And so you can find your leverage points, et cetera. But for me, it was like, I don't care. That's really important. But if I can't see who's holding this in place and who's trying to change that, if I can't see the actors, it doesn't tell me enough. And then there was the social network analysis space where people are showing who knows who and how people are related, but not in the context of the systemic, the leverage points, those dynamics. And so I wanted to be able to see both the actors singly, the actors collectively, like what groups, and then the system dynamics.
As an engineer, I tend to maybe relationships isn't my strong point. So I tend to look at a map showing actors and say, well, why do I need to know the particulars about what this person's value system is? And it's kind of, I just see the bottom line, you do this, he does that, and it all intertwines.
That is exactly the paradigm, the worldview that we are trying explicitly to undermine.
And why is it that just that paradigm is wrong? I'm open,
from systems thinking that relationships are kind of everything, whether it's interpersonal relationships or relationships to dynamics, that it's the connections between things and the massive entanglements and the complexity that actually needs to be understood in order to make real systemic change.
Including the value systems, et cetera, of the person. Okay.
In terms of, the person or the group or whatever, if we're not really see, you know, like the iceberg diagram where you've got the events on the top and then you've got the beliefs way down, deep down. If we can start to surface the patterns that reveal those deeper beliefs, we have more like, that's where we start to shift the dynamics or shift the paradigm. So I hear your,
I want to request that we not spend too much more time going down this theoretical framework, but maybe point you to, if you're looking for an articulation of this paradigm shift, there was an article called Using Emergence to Take Social Innovation to Scale that was written a little while ago, but I think we're getting to a point actually where what was predicted in this piece is now actually possible, in part because of these kinds of tools. So I would suggest taking a look at that, Tony. If you want to talk about it more, we could find some other time, but I'm thinking there are a lot of other people on this call who might have other questions that we might also address.
Thanks, Ben.
Well, if that's okay with you. And I'm happy to talk about this article at some point, but I think that might point in some ways to differences between, say, let's say a more mechanical perspective on how change happens versus a more organic one.
I just wanted to add a cheesy plugin of human systems dynamics here, knowing that we are in a complex environment and not taking it slightly, understanding that we have to take ownership of our actions and bring about the system's change, gives us a collective sense-making ability to be in emergence with the system. And that, you know, for me, that's important for me to hold, to be able to engage, is like, there is something that I don't know, and in humility, and there is something that's wanting to be emerge. How do I get out of the way? I don't know if that makes sense, but we can, yeah.
So we just have a few minutes left, and thank you, Ben. And so it looks like, no, I don't see another hand up. If there's anyone last, so Claire, yeah, go ahead, Claire. You're muted though, so you'll have to start over.
Yeah, I was just wondering, in terms of getting going in your organization, Ben, how you first introduced working with the social systems mapping. Like, did a small group of you play with it first? Like, just a brief kind of trajectory of that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, in this case, we did work as a small team to get that that basic view, that funding flows view that you saw, because we had all that information, you know, as a core team. And then once we had that in the system, we then invited the different groups to add to their profiles and fill out more information there, as well as to add information about themselves as individuals and their connections. And we're still in the process of that. So, you know, other use cases, it might be different. You might, from the get-go, be building the map through a much more broadly participatory process. sumApp lets you approach it either way.
And I think Claire might also be asking about what's your trajectory of getting into mapping at all? Is that like going from zero to this point?
Yeah.
Oh, how would you? Yeah, can you say a little more about that then? And help me understand.
Yeah, just sort of getting going. You know, did you once a small group of you had started playing with it, did you then have a more collective decision that we were going to actually embrace this as a tool that was part of the platform for your organization and how you function?
Right. This is the fourth map of this type that I've created, and so and this organization, the TRCC that sponsored this one, had worked with Kumu mapping, not sumApp, but Kumu mapping previously as well. So we had a lot of experience and understanding of what this tool could do, and we knew we wanted to be able to tell the story of what was happening in the dojo, you know, well, and that was a complex story, and that visualizing these funding flows and the relationships and things like that would really be helpful. So it wasn't, you know, we were not starting from scratch essentially in this particular instance. Where I did get started, actually, Jim, who was talking before, you know, played a major role. with a different event that I am the lead convener for, that's been happening since early 2019. It takes place twice a year, and by the third round of that in the fall of 2019, we said, you know, a map would be really interesting. I had seen a similar map with the network weaving network that Christine and Jim had helped create, and approached them to say, you know, what about creating something for the Now What gathering? And so at that point, I didn't have those skills. I was totally relying on them to get us going, but it also wasn't too bad of a learning curve for some of the basic stuff, to just sort of say, you know, I mean, creating a survey is the heart of it, right? What do you want to ask people? What do you want them to share about themselves, in terms of themselves and in terms of their connections to others? So it was fairly intuitive. The Kumu decorating is where it gets, where the learning curve is a little steeper to get it to show up in the map the way you want.
So one thing I forgot to say in the beginning was that these sessions, we always schedule it so that there's a formal hour, and then there's a half hour extra informal half hour. So I'm going to stay on, and I don't know, Ben, if you're planning on staying on, but a few others will. So if you want to continue to ask questions and just have more open-ended conversation, stick around. But for those of you who need to leave right now or at the top of the hour, we have a goodbye ritual, which I'm going to invite us all to do, which is to unmute your phone or unmute your Zoom. And I'm going to count down 3, 2, 1. And when I get to 1, we just all give each other our blessings and our greeting and our love for the rest of the day. So 3, if everybody who wants to do this unmute. Yep. 3, 2, 1. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Ben.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
And if you want to stick around, just wait while everybody else bumps off, and we're.